Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good. Today is an amazing day. Now, I have fallen in love with the art of podcasting over this last 5 years, and I'm almost to a point where I know how to work the audio settings. So that is just a triumph in itself. But there are people that you look up to in this industry, and we have one of those people here today. Not only does he have one gigantic podcast that I think a lot of you already know, but he just started one in 2024 that all of a sudden I started noticing on the charts. I was like, what is this? Hey, this is the same guy that does True Crime Obsessed. He's also doing a Golden Girls podcast. What is going on here? So you know him originally from True Crime Obsessed. This thing has amassed over 250 million downloads. Think about how that's insane. And then in 2024, he launched the Golden Girls Deep Dive, because who doesn't appreciate the golden era of multicam sitcoms with 4 amazing women? But what's really exciting is that he has a tour now. He is out on the road. We have tons of dates, which I'm going to put in the show notes coming up. I think the next date is Indianapolis. And guess what, folks? That is sold out. So check StubHub for that. But after that, March 10th in New Orleans, and it just goes straight through April 28th. And I'm sure he'll probably add more dates. And on top of that, I was at Barnes & Noble's at the Grove the other day, and he has a book, Failure is Not an Option. Is there anything this man isn't doing? The one, the only Patrick Hinds joins us today. Patrick.
Hello. That was so nice. And listen, I gotta say, I'm 10 years into this podcasting thing, and if you're finally figuring out how the audio works, as we just determined by the fact that it took me 10 minutes to figure out my microphone, you're way ahead of me. So some things never change.
But isn't that the glory and the glory of podcasting? And it always takes you down to oh, I know nothing. You're always dealing with some sort of issue at some point.
Listen, all podcasters are personality hires, all of us. None of us were meant to be running the technical stuff behind the scenes. I have this soundboard that I'm looking at out the door of my studio. I know what one button on that thing does. It has about 700 buttons.
Better. I have this thing that I don't even know how to plug in. It's never been plugged in, Patrick. So then, by the way, what you're listening to is just two people geeking out about podcasting. And of course, there is so much more to this, which we will get into. But I mean, obviously, the question you probably get asked all the time is that when you did this 10 years ago, there's no way that you could have thought True Crime Obsessed would get the audience that it got. You were probably just doing this because you had a true joy and passion and wanted to speak.
Yeah, that's really true. I started podcasting only because I was this gay nerd who loved Broadway, and I was listening to this Broadway podcast that they stopped making it. And I was like, well, someone's going to make that podcast. Someone's going to keep it going. And they didn't. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to figure out how to make a podcast because I need that theater podcast to exist. And then I just fell in love with the art form of podcasting. And I started listening to everything, and then some creators started making a living making podcasts, and I was like, I wonder if I could do that. And if I could, I'm not smart enough to make a smart podcast, so I have to make a true crime podcast. If I'm going to do it, it's going to be a true crime. I found this amazing woman who was another theater podcaster named Jillian Pensavalle, and we both wanted to make a true crime podcast. We just kind of went for it, and I mean, I will say, it's weird to say it, but it kind of just blew up. In the first couple of months, we were making theater podcasts, so we were used to getting a couple hundred listens to our episodes. And in the first couple of months of making True Crime Obsessed, also we're getting 10,000 listens, and then 20,000, and then 100,000 to our episode. And both of our minds were just blown by the growth. And then it just within a year we both quit our jobs to do it full time. And then we launched our Patreon, which was the thing that really
which, by the way, you're one of the #1 creators on Patreon as well. And listen, I mean, I feel like you're too busy to teach me a class, but I need the tutelage here because you really have grown in this really amazing way. And I also want to give a shout out to both of your co-hosts of these podcasts, because that's the one thing. Sometimes I'll be doing so many solo recaps of reality shows, and it gets lonely. It gets lonely when you're at midnight making fun of Lisa Rinna, and you guys bounce off each other so well. And I think that's also picking the right people that you can almost finish each other's sentences.
Truly, thank you for saying that. I mean, I'm nothing without these women, and the truth of the matter is, like with Jillian and me, it was luck and chemistry because we really did not know each other that well when we started making True Crime Obsessed, and she's married, I'm married, I had a young kid at the time, and we were kind of like just figuring it out as we went, and we were learning each other as we were sort of making this podcast. I wanted it to be more serious. She's just naturally so funny. And so I was kind of like, I don't know, let's lean into this and see if that can work. And then it did. And as far as, the Golden Girls Deep Dive podcast with Jen Samar, like she's, a two-time Tony Award nominated Broadway comedic genius. Currently in Death Becomes Her, playing the Goldie Hawn part, if that tells you anything about how funny she is.
That show is supposed to be so. I'm such a theater geek myself, and that is
Yeah.
on my list next time I go to New York.
Oh, you must see it. It is so funny. She is so funny. Plus, the Golden Girls is just like the most amazing source material. Like, you just can't go wrong recapping the Golden Girls, right?
No. And it brings us back to a time, I was a kid in the 80s and I obviously didn't understand the Golden Girls. Like you can watch it now and pick up on so many other things
Oh, yeah.
as an adult. But as a kid, it was just part of that. I think it was like that Saturday evening block on NBC. You had
Yes.
that and then Empty Nest. And I just remember watching
Sisters.
these
Do you
things.
remember Sisters? Like
Yes,
the
of
1 hour
course.
drama that came out at 10 o'clock?
Oh, I watched all of this stuff and I wasn't
Me
supposed
too.
to be watching. I didn't understand probably any of it. Like I'm watching 227 for the love of God.
Totally.
I was like, I grew up in Kansas. Where's my stoop? Why don't I have a stoop?
Really? I loved 227. Oh my God. So good.
So you start these podcasts, and obviously you have this great appreciation for theater. I'm a theater kid from high school. Like, when did your love of the theater start? Because your live
Yeah.
show obviously is you out there telling stories. I think you have a B. Arthur impersonator out there with you, and you
Yeah.
tell a story, but it's a great way to like kind of have a community, to have fans meet other fans and form friendships, which I always love. That's what I think about the theater. Did your love of theater start in high school?
Yeah, yeah. I was just a kid with like a desperate need for attention. So I wanted to be an actor from a really young age. I didn't really know what that meant. I started doing community theater when I was like in middle school, but I didn't think theater was going to be like the thing for me. But then I got to high school and this is so gay, but I went to see the rock opera Tommy on the national tour in like 1994 or whatever. And I sat like we had really good seats. I remember sobbing through it, just loving it so much. And I was like, I will be an actor in the theater when I left that. And it was, but I really wasn't any good. And I remember auditioning for the musical theater program at Emerson College and not getting in, but they gave me enough scholarships to go to the school anyway. And so I auditioned for the musicals. I got into a couple of them, and this is part of the live show that I'm doing right now, is that like being in, and I won't give away how, but being in the musical my sophomore year of college at Emerson was Gypsy. And that sort of led me on this path to meeting B. Arthur and being her like host and guide for a weekend at Emerson College. And it went
The real
hilariously
B. Arthur,
wrong.
not the impersonator you have on stage.
No.
You met the real B. Arthur.
The real
The
Golden
legend.
Girls icon, B. Arthur. And I was sort of asked to be her host for the weekend. And I was like so excited about it. And she just hated me on site. She just hated me on site and tormented me for this entire night. And it was like, so that's kind of what the live show is. It takes place in two times. It takes place in 2014 when my husband and I were literally waiting for our newborn daughter to be delivered to us by our foster care agency. And I'm sort of sitting watching the Golden Girls, waiting for our daughter to arrive and reminiscing on this evening that I spent with B. Arthur that went hilariously and disastrously wrong. But yeah, so like that was kind of, theater is what brought me into this world, into the world of podcasting. And somebody was asking me about this the other day, like, how did you end up being a podcaster? And I was like, I don't know. I just kind of talk a lot. And it seemed to be a good place to put my energy.
Well, first off, was B wearing shoulder pads when she visited? Okay.
Oh my God.
Iconic all the ladies in Golden Girls, iconic shoulder pad work.
The shoulder pad work. There was one episode that we were recapping recently for the Golden Girls deep dive where I was like, If B. Arthur were trying to walk straight through a metal detector at the airport, she wouldn't make it. She would have to turn sideways to get. I was like, she's ready for takeoff. You cannot believe the shoulder pads. Like, intellectually, you know about the shoulder pads from the 80s, but then you watch
Yes.
these episodes and you cannot believe it.
No, it was like full, like there's like big triangles happening just from the
Yes.
shoulder pads. I
And
loved it.
she started it, and then it was like Blanche. Like all of a sudden, Rue McClanahan's wearing these enormous shoulders. Like it's doubling her size.
Yeah, but
It's wild.
I always wonder if there were like backstage fights at the Golden Girls of who could out shoulder pad one another. Of
Totally.
like, Bees
And
is bigger than mine this week, and I must have larger shoulder pads.
they could rumble, and nobody would get bruised. They're layered up like football players. It's wild.
I was listening to your most recent True Crime Obsessed episode this morning. I think it was Lisa Frank. You were the
Yeah.
multi-part. And I was just thinking about high school theater because I was researching you a little bit. And I just thought, I was this high school theater kid. And this is before podcasting existed. And I always just wonder if high school theater kids now have drama teachers are like, those who can't do, they don't teach, they potentially start a podcast. Like it's a great pipeline for high school theater kids to be like, there's always something, because like you, I got into this not knowing you could make a living out of it, not knowing any of this. Now with the True Crime Obsessed, it is such and when you started this 10 years ago, correct?
Look, no, it was 2017, so like
Sorry.
8.5. Yeah.
Yeah, but like it is different. I always talk about this on the show that like we primarily focus on pop culture, but true crime has become pop culture. I mean,
Sure,
Dateline. I grew up 48-hour murder mysteries on CBS, and then it really just kind of exploded where we talk about these things like it is full on pop culture, which is wild because you know, you guys are sensitive about these things. You have a great sense of humor and you walk us through these stories. Have you noticed over these 8 years of having to change or to pull punches? Because this is sometimes we can get really desensitized to some of these stories.
I was just talking about this to somebody else today that like one of the things we're really proud of at True Crime Obsessed is that we've really changed with the true crime community, like in the way that we tell these stories. So when we sort of started in the tradition of My Favorite Murder, like true crime comedy, although we were always our comedy, not to say that theirs isn't the same way, but our comedy never came from the victims or the crime. It always came from the idiot prosecutor or the bad defense attorney or just like this crappy way the documentary was. It never came from the victims or whatever. But, over time, we sort of taken the comedy label off of the podcast because as we've gotten to know several of the families of the stories that we've covered and gotten to be friends with them, and then beyond that there are other true crime podcasters that really focus on the ethics of true crime, and we've always aspired, and I think we've made it our mission to sort of be in line with that kind of true crime storytelling. So I think our episodes can still be very funny, but and we believe strongly in the way that we tell these stories because I think the stories are important and they need to be told, and sometimes the only way people can digest it is with a little bit of light or a little bit of humor around the edges. But we've really changed our storytelling style, and we do look back at some of our episodes and think, oh, we would definitely do that differently now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the evolution. If you really get into this, or I do consider this an art form in some way, you do change. And like the world changes and you kind of change with that. And I think that's okay to actually learn things, especially even from the people that are doing them. I was just going through your episode list too, is that, you guys, if you have not listened to True Crime Obsessed, I mean, these are some of the documentaries that we even talk about or that you have necessarily watched. Like, I mean, this I feel like didn't get enough attention was the catfishing of Tegan and Sarah, Fanatical. This I believe is on Hulu, and I'm a huge fan of Tegan and Sarah, from back in the day, and I did not realize that they had this, a catfish. And it was this I think a very well told story by Aaron Lee Carr, who you'll see pop up a lot with documentaries. Is there a difference for you with I actually thought that was a great documentary. Is there a difference for you when you're realizing you're watching a really good story told documentary wise and a really bad one?
It's funny because when we started making True Crime Obsessed, it was probably a year before the true crime documentary explosion. So it's hard to remember that there was a time when it was just like documentary nerds were watching true crime documentaries and other people were not watching them. So that was kind of what we started with. We were total true crime documentary nerds, and then they kind of exploded. So there was a golden age, if you can use that term,
I
of like
know.
true crime
Yeah. Isn't that
documentaries
wild? Yeah.
where there was like the real like geniuses making true crime
Like
documentaries.
Paradise Lost always stands out of
Yes,
my head.
Joel
Yeah.
Berlinger is like that. That's a great example of we'll cover anything he does. Werner Herzog, he's another example. And you know, as they started to become more mass produced, so many of them are just not that good. Some of them are fine. Most of them are fine. Some of them are bad, and only a handful stand out as being like amazing. And I would say we have a handful of new directors in this crop of new documentaries that I would put in the canon with like the Joe Berlingers and the Werner Herzogs, and like Sky Borgman is one of them. She directed the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight, which was the documentary that came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, that it just took the internet by storm. It was about that woman Jan Broberg, who as a little girl was kidnapped by her neighbor
Yes.
like 4 times, and her parents just sort of like gave her to the neighbor to like do with, like, just an insane documentary. And she's made so many documentaries since. She did the recent Lacey Peterson documentary on Netflix that everybody was going crazy for, that was very Lacey focused, very victim focused. And but Sky is a little bit of an outlier. Like, she's a true artist, and most of them are just kind of fine, and then there are some that are just awful, and you're like, it does the story,
Yes.
it does the case no service by having been made. In fact, like, in some instances it'll sort of set the case back.
Yeah, well, you just realize it's a vehicle for commercials, like this is
Mm-hmm.
like you're just slapping,
Truly.
this is just content at this point. But it is interesting you brought up the Lacey Peterson one, because I will notice this, and you notice this with movies, and especially in the late '90s, early aughts, or I think late '90s. Is that now we're having competing documentaries. We have a
Oh
Lacey Peterson
yeah,
on Netflix. We have a Scott Peterson over here on Peacock, and it reminded me of that
totally.
time when there was like multiple volcano movies or multiple
Do you
earthquake
remember the
movies.
week, like in our childhood, when there were three Amy Fisher movies on at the same time? It was like Alyssa Milano,
Shout out,
Drew
yeah,
Barrymore,
Drew
and
Barrymore.
some unknown, and they all came out the same week, and you're like, oh my god. But no,
How did this
that's true.
happen?
Yeah. And what's really sad is that they used to only make new documentaries about a case that already had a documentary if there was new information. That is not the case anymore. Now it's like Oxygen will make one, and then Peacock will make one, and then Hulu will make one, and then Netflix, and it's like there are some streamers that you think have better ethics than others. Like Netflix usually is like a cut above, but then they'll do something crappy and you're like, oh, Netflix. Like, so, I mean, I literally have no idea who won Oscars the other night. I'm not a the only content I consume at this point is true crime documentaries. So I will say that I do think that I have a bit of like discerning taste there. I kind of know when they're going to be good and when they're going to be not good.
Oh yeah, I mean, Patrick, it is so interesting because I mainly cover a lot of reality television, and I watch true crime documentaries to relax, or
I know.
I watch the Oscar. I'm like, the Oscar. It's a nice change of pace from reality television,
Yeah.
and which is so bizarre to think about things in that way. But like, you've talked about Dateline, you guys talk about Keith Morrison, and that was where it really, for me, I think a lot of people, you're delving into these stories, but then it got to the point where I was like very judgmental. I'm like, if it's an hour long Dateline, I don't want it. I only want the 2 hour ones. And I only want the ones that Keith narrates. Like, you get
Yes.
really
Yes.
specific, which I think is like kind of speaking to True Crime Obsessed as well, is that it's not the stories, it's you guys taking us through the stories. That's what we want, like these reliable narrators. But it is interesting that we get nitpicky about these horrific crimes.
I know. I know. And it used to be, and I was like this back in my early days of consuming true crime podcasts, that I would get like obsessed with certain cases and I didn't care if there was new information. I would listen to like all of the podcasts about, just to like listen to more like people's opinions on the evidence, right? Because that's kind of all we can offer. We're not cops, we're not investigators. All we can really do is offer our own context and our opinions. And I think you're right about the reliable narrator. And that is a thing that we take seriously. We want people to be able to feel like they can listen to us, and they're gonna, not that we're gonna have any answers, but just that we might bring some, like, we're a loud gay guy and a loud opinionated woman. And there isn't many of those combinations in the true crime space. So you are definitely going to get something different when you listen to us.
Um, I was thinking about my fixation, like we all had on that first season of Serial, and what was
Mm-hmm.
so interesting was that you know the parasocial relationship, people you had people turning into detectives, Reddit
Yes.
threads, trying to solve this case, trying to and there have been a couple of instances where podcasts have thrown out information that has been useful, but a lot of the times, in your opinion, do you think this kind of community detective work is overall helpful, or do you think sometimes we're getting lost in the weeds and it distracts?
It's very nuanced because I think it can be very helpful. For example, like Bob Ruff, who created the Truth and Justice podcast, he will spend entire seasons with his team of investigators, like researching and really trying to find new information in a case. I think in an example like that's really good. That's really helpful. But people don't understand. Like, if you just think you're gonna go to the crime scene and look for new information, like if you find something, that thing can now no longer be used in a court of law if you touch it. There, like, it can be really, it can be
People
well
don't
done.
understand how the actual criminal system, the justice system works. Like, it's one
Exactly.
thing, which I think that's the frustrating thing. And this even spills out over into Bravo. Like, I never thought I'd have to have like a secondhand law degree to watch Bravo nowadays, but everything is like a criminal court system. And we don't seem to understand still how the mechanics of the legal system works. So sometimes you're like, why can't that be admitted? And it's a weird game.
I mean, it's one thing if it's a case that the authorities have given up on, and they need anything to sort of reignite, interest in the case. And you see where I think that there has been some success is like on the internet sleuths. I think there have been some examples of internet sleuths finding new good information, but there have been other, and I think far more examples of internet sleuthing pointing the finger at somebody who did not do it. I mean, we've seen people literally die by suicide, having been accused by the internet of crimes that they did not commit. And I think it's hard because the authorities notoriously very often don't do their jobs, and we need citizen detectives to sort of get involved. But like, it's a really fine line. There
Yeah.
really is no good answer.
No, I mean, so you guys have how many, we were talking like 500 episodes of
Yeah.
True Crime Obsessed, but I subscribed, I rated, which by the way, reminder, just because they're a huge podcast doesn't mean you don't have to subscribe and still rate it 5 stars.
Please.
The man took
Yes.
some time to be with us here today. He's going to be a busy guy. We got to give him something here
Please
to
go rate
make it
review
worth
us on
his
Apple
while.
Podcasts. That would be amazing.
But what are you allowed to tease your upcoming slate? Like, what is the decision making process that you two go? Is there like an upvote, downvote? Do you guys have arguments of like, there's no way I want to
No,
cover this?
Gillian, you really used to be like back in the day when we first started. We'd get to the end of an episode and be like, "What should we do next week?" There's only like 40 true crime documentaries. Like, what are we gonna do next week? And we would just pick one, not out of a hat, but we'd be like, "Oh, I want to do this one. I want to do this one." As the world has changed, Jillian, my co-host, has really taken over the schedule, and we're very conscious of um, diversity in what we cover. So, we want to cover what people want. We want to do the popular documentaries, but it's very important to us to be equally covering people of color, indigenous stories, like stories that don't get as many eyes on them in other ways. So Jillian weighs all of those factors, sort of popularity and diversity, and then puts together a schedule, and I just kind of do what she says. There are times when I'm like, can we please bump this one up? I really want to talk about the Zodiac Killer this week. And then they'll like change the schedule.
I've got a hankering to talk Zodiac. Yeah.
There was a new Zodiac one on Netflix that was kind of garbage, but I kind of loved it. And
I kind of loved it too, but I know exactly what you're saying. And that was like, it's weird. You're like, I'm putting this on like warm PJs, like it was really, it was really weirdly very addictive. Cause I just watched this one. I don't know if you guys, are planning on talking about this, the Hulu Fox Hollow murders.
Oh yeah, the gay one. We are definitely like, that was a big one in our Facebook group. It's on the calendar. Jillian was just saying that like all of the streamers have just dropped like 2 or 3 series that everyone's going crazy for. So we are just starting our coverage of the new Gabby Petito one on Netflix.
I thought that, by the way, I thought that was, I mean, if you want to talking about ethical storytelling, I thought that did a really decent job at really highlighting Gabby in a very ethical way.
Yeah, I agree. And her family, all of her, she's got four parents. She's got one of those kids that
Yeah.
like her parents got divorced when she was like not even two, and they both remarried. And her birth parents stayed friends, but they married really awesome people. Like she had four parents, and they're all involved in the documentary. And the documentary really does give so much more context to her story and what happened than I knew. So I agree. I think that's a really, really good one. The Fox Hollow murders we're definitely covering. There's so, like we keep saying, like I would go back to bartending tomorrow if everybody would just stop killing each other
Yeah.
and like we ran out of stuff to cover, you know?
Well, that's what I always speculated, and this is like very dark, but like, 15 years ago, I was like, what if Dateline runs out of these murders? I mean, will there eventually be a
I know.
documentary where they try to start a murder just so they can cover a murder? Like, I mean,
I
that's
mean,
that,
oh God.
but we never run out of them.
Unfortunately, no.
I didn't know about Kurt Baumeister from Fox Hollow Murders. That was like,
Oh
and I know
yeah.
that, well, because I'm not in like the true crime community.
No,
I'm just
same.
somebody
I
that
didn't know
watches
either. I
it by
mean,
myself.
but that's even more sad is that there are now so many serial killers that there are ones we don't even know their names. You know what I mean?
Well, and the guys, and I know they're going to cover this at one point, but I just thought what was so weirdly such dark humor is that they make this point of he took his own life, so he never gained the fame that
Right.
people like Jeffrey Dahmer got because he never went
Right.
to trial. Like he never reached the heights of Jeffrey
I
Dahmer.
know.
We don't know this man's name, but also
I
that's another
know.
one that really highlights the victims. But I just
Well,
thought that thought of
I know.
it's like, hey guys, if you didn't make it in acting, if you didn't make it in Broadway, maybe consider murdering. You know?
Serial killing. I mean, the other thing that makes me crazy that makes no sense to me is if the serial killer kills himself, all of the charges get dropped. So like
Yes.
if the and this
Then, then,
happened
then,
with
then there's
Robert
no
Durst.
search for the victims.
Nope. But also the charges get unless they've been already convicted. Like Robert Durst was his conviction for murdering Susan Berman was overturned. They were
Guys, he's talking
retrying
about
him.
The Jinx, which
Yes.
actually just did an update last year. But Robert Durst, obviously, yes.
And they were retrying him, and he died in the middle of his trial. So even though they were going to get the conviction, we know he killed her. Robert Durst is technically not a convicted murderer because he died before his conviction could be reinstated. Isn't that insane?
That really is wild how
Yeah.
all of this all is put together. What is the also then when you realize this is getting this fan base for you guys for True Crime Obsessed? I always find the parasocial relationship very interesting. Like I have so many listeners of this show that I have like dearly loved that like support and encourage, and sometimes a little ones that maybe a little left of center that actually genuinely scare me. Has
Yeah.
that what has that been like to build this kind of amazing community over these 8 years?
I'll tell you. I mean, it really is my favorite part of it. Like, so I've been saying for this tour that I'm on, the tagline for the tour is "Come for the show, stay for the party." So the show is only an hour long, and then for the last like 90 minutes, we all just go to the venue bar and we hang out and we take pictures and we meet and I sign books and we just kind of get to know each other. And like, it is really, I really love it. I love meeting the listeners. I love hearing from the listeners. I've only had like one experience with a listener that went badly that I was like, oh, that was, but it is there are like when I was in Denver, like there's a woman who I met through the podcast. I wouldn't have known her any other way. She was a listener and we became friends and we like met for coffee before the show. And I don't consider that a parasol. Like I think of her as my
Yeah.
friend, right?
No, yeah, there are things that it is weird. It's like, yeah, there
Yeah.
are actual friendships that are created where I'm like, oh, this is just so incredible that this happened.
Yeah.
And I always consider this just a conversation where I'm the loudmouth, but you're all
Yes.
here with me, like
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah.
the one over talking and you're telling me to shut up. I wanted to talk about also the book because Failure is Not an Option, which is out now. Like I said, I saw it at Barnes and Nobles. I was like, holy moly. These are these things where like, did you ever in a million years, I know like in your fantasy of fantasies, think that I'm going to have a book one day?
Ah, well, just a quick minor correction. It's failure is not an option.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Everybody does it.
Is that
Everybody. It was when
big
I tell
change
you
there. By the way, way better title than what I was saying.
that, no, I had to fight my publisher for that title. They're like, no one's gonna get it. Everyone's gonna say failure's not an option. I'm like, no, it's funny. Failure's not an option is kind of the idea. But like they were so right. Everybody calls it failure's not an option because like obviously why wouldn't you? Like that's the known expression. But the whole idea of it is that like it's my 12 stories that I would tell at cocktail parties about like my most epic embarrassing failures. And my
Can you give
publisher
us
really
one?
wanted
Can you tease us with one? I know we'll buy the book, but is there
yeah.
one that
Well, like, okay. Oh God. All right. One time, one time, my husband and I desperately needed to get to Cape Cod to see my mother, who was not well, and we. This is air quotes. We chartered a private plane because there was no other way to get there. Now, I thought that we had booked like a private jet. Like I thought we were Taylor Swift style. I was like, oh my God, so fancy. We get to the airport. It was literally a three-seat crop duster. The hot pilot said to me as I was like, I'm not getting in that thing. He was like, don't worry, it's got the top of the line uh lawnmower engine on the market. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. But that's not even the bad part. We got on the plane, and because I, in my own stupid, dumb, gay brain, I was like, we booked a private jet. I just assumed that there would be a bathroom on the plane. And I had been drinking coffee and water all morning. And it's only like a 65-minute flight. But I'm one of those, like, when you gotta go, you gotta
Yeah.
go
Oh,
kind of
I'm
people.
right there with you. Yeah.
And the second we took off, I was like, I I have to I have to pee. And I don't like have to pee kind of. Like I suddenly
Yeah.
have to pee like I really I she's got pee. And I will let you read the book to find out how this situation gets resolved, but when I tell you it was um just hilariously horrendous.
Spoiler
That's
alert,
just
there
what I'm saying.
was a plane crash involved. That's all the yeah,
No, I mean we made it there alive, but oh my God, I mean like just
I feel
the
like that's a lot of my life. Is like just the humiliating story after
yeah,
humiliating story. Even when you're
yeah.
at the top of your game, there will be something that always brings me right back down to earth.
Always, always, always.
This was interesting too because I think you have one of the most beautiful media kits that I've seen, and
Oh,
this
thanks.
is another where I just like God. You are very inspirational, sir. But you know, you like me, and you know, I've had lifelong struggles with my weight. You've lost, I think, like 80 pounds. I always call
Yeah,
myself the Luther Vandross of podcasting because I yo-yo up and down and up. Way less successful than the brilliant Luther Vandross. But I
yeah,
thought this was interesting. Is that part of you is so open, and do you think that is a key to success in this day and age?
yeah. Well, what happened was I got on Manjaro, which is one of the GLP-1 drugs, and I knew I was going to lose a lot of weight, and I was really making a lot of like lifestyle changes at the same time. I started taking exercise really seriously and sleeping really seriously,
Yeah, but the
and
sleep, sleep. Oh.
yeah, I mean, and I've got an 11-year-old daughter. Like it's not easy, but what I knew was having a platform of any size. I have a small platform, but I knew that like people were going to see me losing weight, and the thing about weight loss, as I've seen other people lose weight and me not be able to lose weight, I it always made me feel so bad about myself that like they had been able to figure out something that I hadn't been able to figure out, or they finally got the willpower that I'm just not strong enough to get. And these GLP-1 drugs, obviously I'm not a doctor. If you want to get on them, go talk to your doctor, but whatever. For me, it was an absolute miracle drug. And so I knew that I had to talk about it because I could not be in a position of people seeing me lose weight and just letting them think that I just discovered a love of celery that they haven't been able to love, and it just wasn't that. And I knew that I had to be open about that because otherwise I just it never made any sense to me not to talk about it if I was ever asked. And I do think, I mean, my life has always been an open book. My we have a daughter that we adopted through foster care. I love talking about that and telling that story because it's like, people don't think of foster care as a necessarily a way of becoming a family
Parents.
with a
Yeah.
with a kid. And I'm a firm believer that you are a family without a kid. I don't think you need a kid to be a family. But I love sort of sharing my experience and sort of like the things that I've learned in life.
Um, Speaking of being a parent, I always ask this of like reality stars or actors. What awareness does your child have of what you? How do you explain what you do to your child?
It's funny because, she knows that we make podcasts and she's come to our live. What the only time she kind of looks at me askance is like if we're ever at like a restaurant and a listener will come over and say hi. And she'll be like, "How does that person know you?" And I'm like, "Oh, from the podcast." And she doesn't quite understand how that is a thing. So, but we tell her everything. Like, she sits in the podcast booth with me. Every time she comes to the office, she wants to make a podcast. So we'll sit down and record a 5-minute podcast, me and her. And,
Ah.
and and we talk about it all because my husband is also our business manager. So our work is very, I was that guy who, like, 4 or 5 years ago was like, screw work-life balance. I love my life. I love my work. They're both going to be like integrated at all times. And it's true. That is the truth. And so we talk about work at home all the time, and we talk about life at work all the time. And so I think she gets it. She always says when she grows up, she wants to be a waitress, a taxi driver, a podcaster, and a dog groomer. So it's in there somewhere.
By the way, you can do all four of those jobs at once. I mean, like that
Absolutely.
legitimately. And if you start a podcast, you're going to need all four of those jobs. Like that's. Would you ever think about that? Of how many podcasters you've inspired to start podcasts? And I've had that like minimally, and I always try to tell people, don't do this because you expect to make a living out of this. That is never anything that I ever expected in a million years. But I'm always so encouraging. Like if you have a story to tell, or if you have an opinion, just make sure it's your own.
Yeah. I really have always thought about putting together a YouTube series about like starting a podcast, because I feel so strongly that, if you get into anything for the right reasons, it's going to work out. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to quit your job and make your podcast full time. But if you there were so many years before I was able to make a living making a podcast that I really relied on my podcast for my creative outlet. I got so much out of it, even though it was really hard work. It was exhausting. I had so many other things going on. I still, the reward of doing it was so present in my life. And, I love telling people, look, there is a way you can make money making podcasting. No question. It just depends on how hard you're willing to work. When I was making my theater podcast, we didn't have enough downloads to sell ads through a traditional way, but I was reaching out to every theater, production company, every performing arts camp, every, to see if they wanted to advertise. And we weren't making a living, but we were covering our costs, and podcasting is like any scrappy art form. You got to be willing to hustle. If you're willing to hustle,
and also to never, you can't give up.
Right.
Rome wasn't built in a day. Like this is something that, sometimes things explode. Sometimes they take years. I mean, it really is just like commitment. So back to true crime a little bit. And of course, I'm talking about the Golden Girls. Do you ever think, because I mean, you're in, I think, the second season of recapping the Golden Girls. How many overall seasons of the Golden Girls, I'm trying to remember, were there?
There's 7 seasons of the show proper, and then I think 9 episodes of the Golden Palace, which was the spinoff with Dorothy.
I remember that. I forgot about the Golden Palace. Oh my God.
Yeah.
What is your what is your favorite Golden Girls episode, and is there a least favorite Golden Girls episode? When did you think it was getting in the weeds?
I never thought that it got. I love the series as a whole, all the way through the end. It never jumped the shark for me. I think my favorite episodes, I mean, there's the episode in season 1 with Dr. Jonathan Newman, who's like the little person that Rose is dating, and the jokes in that are so funny because none of all of the jokes are at the expense of the women, and none of the jokes are at the expense of the little person. It's all about how uncomfortable they feel and how he's totally centered and funny and smart and accomplished. And I love that episode. My least favorite episodes are like their message episodes. You know what I mean?
That was huge in the 80s too. You'd have a very special episode of the Golden Girls or Growing Pains.
The 2-part Christmas one where they go to work at at the shelter for the weekend or whatever. And you're like, that's great. That's what everybody should do that. But is it funny? Not really. There's also one episode, I don't know what season it's in, but it's called Empty Nest. Now, we all know that there was a spin-off series called Empty Nest.
Richard Mulligan, yeah.
But the episode that they did on the Golden Girls called Empty Nest, which they were hoping would be the pilot for the show, is awful. And it's none of the people that you know from the Empty Nest TV show that eventually happens. It's Rita Moreno and somebody else. And it's like the Golden Girls are only in the first 2 minutes of it. And then the whole thing is about them. And it just went nowhere. And it didn't that's not the pilot that became the pilot of the show Empty Nest. So that's probably my least favorite episode of the Golden Girls.
What do you think it is about nostalgia? And I think, when this podcast hit in 2024, it was already at the top of the charts. It was already, just out of the gate, top of the charts. And I think that's obviously you and your host, and that, says what an audience you've built. But also, I think there is something of this, obviously nostalgia now more than ever. How do you kind of explain the success of that? Or did I just explain it for you?
Well,
Sorry.
maybe. I mean, the thing with the Golden Girls is they're like the Brady Bunch. Like they've never been off the air. There is something about the Golden Girls that I think everybody that I meet is like, I loved watching that show with my grandma. Like that they like it brings them back to that time of being young and being with their grandmother. And like there's that. I mean, there's also the fact that like we are living in tumultuous, scary times, and I think that people need an escape. That we don't talk politics on the Golden Girls. We wanted it to be your comfort podcast. And, I think that there's a real need for that now. And
If the
yeah,
Golden Girls existed today, would they have to get political? Would there have to be like, Blanche is an
yeah,
independent? What does that mean? Like, would it
right.
have to
Well,
go that way?
I think so. I mean, I think there's no getting around it now. I mean, I think that you kind of got to take a side. There's not very many things out in the world that aren't polarized because like as a viewer, you kind of want to know where you're putting your energy. Like you don't want to be putting your energy behind something that you don't support and believe in. And
Yeah.
so I think that I think that they would have to, but I could see a world where Blanche is a Republican and really struggles with voting for Trump or not. And then like Rose, like, is she going to vote at all? Like I can see that kind of
And that
that
would be
being
a
the
very
conversation.
special episode of watching
Yeah.
the results of the 2024 election, potentially. Also, I think also sometimes, and you guys highlight this in the episode, these ladies are all just so wickedly funny. Like it's well
Yes.
written, and also each one of those ladies are so solid in their acting work. Multicam sitcom, for the most part, has died because of the rise
Yeah.
of single cam sitcoms, and this is something like each of what they're nailing hard jokes, and they're
Well,
rooting it in reality because they're just amazing actors.
what's so wild about that is learning Estelle Getty's backstory. Like Estelle Getty did 30 years of community theater in New York. She did not have a single professional acting credit to her name until like 1984 when she did the off Broadway production of a play called Torch Song Trilogy that she only got.
She was in Torch Song Trilogy?
And yes, and she only got that because it's a wild backstory. Harvey Fierstein was
You guys,
writing.
Harvey Fierstein, amazing actor, playwright, but you guys might know him the best from Mrs. Doubtfire, but look into this man's life.
Yes.
He's a
Yeah, yeah.
legend. Yeah.
Long story short, he got this downtown theater company to produce 3 plays for him. He decided to make it a trilogy. He didn't know what to write for the third one. And this actress, Estelle Getty, who he just knew from the off Broadway scene, was like, write a play where I play your mother and I'll be in it with you. And so that's why he wrote that for her. The Torch Song Trilogy ended up being amazing. It went off Broadway, then it won the Tony, and then it went to Los Angeles on tour, and she was with it. And that was how the producers for the Golden Girls saw Estelle Getty and brought her in for the audition. And the point is just to say she had, I don't think, any television credits when she started doing the Golden Girls. And there she is holding her own with 3 of like the absolute icon legend television actresses of their day.
Man,
Like just absolutely incredible.
I didn't know that story, and that's going to fuel me for the rest of the day. I
But
love how things are built like that. I love how
let me
moments
tell
you
you,
never give up.
this is what the Golden Girls Deep Dive podcast is all about. This is why we call it the Golden Girls Deep Dive podcast, because we give you those backstories in every episode. It's like all of the recap of the episode, but then also all of the behind the scenes, the tidbits, the little pieces of trivia that you didn't know. That's why we wanted to make the podcast.
Once you get to the Golden Palace, do you already have your eyes set on another nostalgia show? Because I was joking to the Watch What Crappens guys a couple of weeks ago, and I said, listen, if I could do it all over again, what I would do is I would try to be on a very successful 90s show. I'd try to be a good enough actor to get on a 90s show so I can eventually recap it. Because that seems to be the pipeline now to a successful podcast. And this is why you're a legend. The pipeline usually is star on a show and then 20 years later do the podcast of that show, which I think should be illegal. It's not fair to us podcasters. But
totally
you did
agree.
it the other way, and you are successful without ever having starred in the Golden Girls.
Well,
what's your next show?
We haven't decided yet. We know that when we launch a Patreon, we want to do.
What's on your Patreon? What's going on over there?
We don't have a Patreon for Golden Girls yet.
Okay.
We've both been just too busy. We think that we're gonna start a Patreon, and our bonus episodes we'll do like two or three episodes at a time of another sitcom. And I think the first one that we would do would be Designing Women because everybody wants that.
Oh,
I
Meshock
know.
Taylor. Meshock Taylor Hive Rise. Yeah.
I know. He's incredible. But I mean, I can't believe there hasn't been a Modern Family recap. Like, you can't tell me Jesse Tyler Ferguson and Eric Stone Street wouldn't do like an amazing recap podcast, you
Patrick,
know?
you know that's already in the work. You
I hope
know that's
so.
already in the works.
I
Which, by the
really
way,
hope so.
that show had a couple more seasons in it, and I feel like that will get
100%.
rebooted, just because I
Well,
feel like they are bummed that they stopped when they did.
they were apparently they made a pilot for a show about Mitch and Cam moving to Cam's hometown, and it just didn't go. But I mean, like all of those actors are so incredible. It would be amazing for them to come back for more seasons.
Do you have about 10 more minutes?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So a hard pivot back to true crime.
Yeah.
Obviously, you guys have been covering this stuff for so long. And we were talking about like sometimes being desensitized to the topics that you cover. And you guys seem like you have a real awareness of that and also trying to highlight stories that people might not know about and do it in this really fair way. What has been, I guess, what has been, it's hard to say favorite, but what is one where you were like, this one meant something to me or to us and obviously to the audience as well? Like, if we were starting with True Crime Obsessed for the first time, what is the one you send people to first?
So I would say there's maybe two different answers to that question because the one that I always send people to is it's called Grizzly Man, and it's
Oh, Werner
you know
Herzog's,
yes,
oh, the poop
and
is
it's
so warm. The poop.
oh my god, the poop it just
Yeah.
came out of her butt. It's a part of her. It's about this crazy man who went to live with the bears in Alaska 15 summers in a row. And finally, the bears got fed up with him and ate him. And I'm telling you, it was 14 years too long. Like, the bears were in no danger. He thought, like, he was pretending that he was protecting the bears. They were on a nature preserve. Nobody could bother them. He went and lived with the bears. And, like, they finally just got fed up with his shit and they ate him and his girlfriend. And it's Werner Herzog who does the whole thing like a horror movie. Like it's like
Oh, they're guys. They have audio of the bears eating him, and Werner
yeah,
hears it, and he's like, "No, no one will ever hear this
never listen
audio
to this.
again. This is
Never
too."
listen.
And you're as an audience member, you're so like, "Oh
I
my
know.
god, it's so
I know.
gripping."
Well, because the guy had a camcorder, so much of the documentary is this man's footage. So like, I mean, and some of it is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I mean, he gets, really
Yep.
amazing stuff, but he was definitely, not well. And he brought his girlfriend out there with him for the last summer, and the bears ate both of them. Like the bears ate them alive. It's wild. So that's the one that we were always like, all right, this is a pretty good representation of like who we are and what we do. And then, it's hard to narrow down the ones that are the most meaningful to us. Like they're all meaningful in different
Well,
ways,
you said you've
like
had
we just
victims' families, or you've associated sometimes with them. Is there
yeah.
somebody that's reached out to you in particular where you're like, "Wow, I didn't know this actually affected them as well"?
We have a really good relationship with a woman named Julie Murray. Her sister is Maura Murray, and Maura Murray is probably one of the most famous missing person cases in modern history. It was 2004 when she vanished. She disappeared the same week Facebook launched. So hers was the first sort of like social media missing persons case, and it's a very strange story. She was a student at UMass Amherst, and we don't know why she got in her car like 8 o'clock at night and drove north into New Hampshire, where her car spun out. It was on a icy road, and it hit a tree, and a couple of the people nearby saw her, but then, somebody called 911, and by the time the police got there, 7 minutes later, she was gone. Just like no, and there's been no trace of her ever since. Nobody has any idea what happened to her. And that was 21 years ago now. And her sister, Julie, has become a really big advocate for, ethical true crime storytelling, but also just for her sister who's disappeared. Julie fully believes that the case is solvable. She believes that the New Hampshire police know what happened, but they haven't been able to prove it, so they haven't been able to say it. There's been multiple documentaries about this case. Every podcast has covered it, but we have a really good relationship with Julie. She's been on our podcast. We've done stuff with her, and it's those kinds of relationships that we really value and take really seriously.
Have you ever gotten like legitimately scared watching or covering these? Because I remember watching or reading the book about the Golden State Killer,
Yeah.
who's the woman passed away, unfortunately, Patton
Oh
Oswalt.
yeah, I'll be gone in the dark.
All Be Gone in the Dark. I remember watching that or reading that, and I remember just being, for some reason, just too late at night reading this and turned off the lights
Yeah.
and got really, really scared. Have you
Yeah.
ever watched or said something and then just started like getting lost in your own mind and getting scared shitless?
Not so much now. Now that I like live in an apartment building in New York City, like I think it would be kind of hard to get to me to kill me, you know. But I will say, when I was a kid, well, a couple of things. When I was a kid, I used to watch Unsolved Mysteries, and that
Yeah,
used
yeah,
to
yeah.
scare the shit out of me because the
Just
end of
Robert
Unsolved
Stack
Mysteries
alone is scary.
so scary. And like, I lived in a house that was like the back faced the woods. It was just pitch black back there. And I remember like the closing credits music was like it was like absolutely terrifying
Yes.
music. So there's that. I will say that like I'm a very early riser and I'm often walking to the office between like 4 and 5 in the morning. And in New York City, like walking down the street, like walking down 8th or 9th Avenue at 4 in the morning is kind of scary. Like you're kind of just looking at everybody, like who's gonna be the one that's gonna take the shot at me?
Yeah.
So it does make you aware, it keeps you on your toes for sure.
Okay, so folks, this is the call to action. Obviously, we know Patrick, or you might know Patrick. Maybe you're a fan of his that you've never listened to this show before. Which, thank you. You're welcome here anytime. But I want to just highlight this tour that he has coming up. This is an evening with Patrick Hinds, laughs, drinks, and drama. We have sold out dates, a lot of these, but we have a lot of dates that are still for sale. And where do we go to get tickets for this? Because I think this would actually be, and I think you've already hit Los Angeles. So I'm screwed. I can't now come to this unless I travel.
Yes.
But how do we get tickets?
So it's patricktours.com. That'll take you right to the date. That'll take you right to the website where the tickets are on sale. I think we've announced like 17 cities. I'm doing 40 cities total.
Yeah, you're like the Dead at this point. Grateful Dead. You're like, do people
Listen,
follow you around to like each tour?
Sometimes, yeah, there are some really oh, I saw you in Seattle, but I'm gonna come see you in Portland too. Like, I always say to people, it is my absolute favorite thing I get to do. I'm so grateful that people show up to see it. It is such a fun night. We're doing this thing where, bring a friend, of course, but if you can't find somebody who wants to come with you, come alone. And we've got
Yes.
these big stickers that say like solo and fabulous, which means you're there alone, but you want to make friends.
Oh, I love that.
It's so great. I had this group of 4 women come up to me at my Denver show, and they're like, "Look, we're 4 solo and fabulous, and we all found each other, and now we're gonna be friends." And that is like, that hangout after the show. It's at least an hour and a half, and people are just mingling and making friends and exchanging phone numbers. And we've seen this in like Salt Lake City, for example. So many of them met each other that we've now got this amazing like Facebook group, like our Salt Lake City TCO Facebook group that has like over 100 people in it. And it's, the Northern California group is the same. They just started an Indianapolis group. We've got one in Arizona, and it's just, we just want to bring people together, make you laugh for an hour, and then just hang out and make new friends.
I've got a lot of friends in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to encourage them to go to that on April 26th.
Please,
And also,
I love Columbus.
You end in flipping London, which last time I checked, I don't believe that's in America. I've not checked the map lately.
Well, we'll see. We're just taking land left and right. We don't know what's going to happen.
By the way, by August, we might actually have taken over. But this is so exciting. We go overseas as well, which that's the other thing that you don't count on going into podcasts. Like all of a sudden, I have like a decent listenership in Australia. I'm like, what is it about the Australian people that like me? I don't get it.
They love podcasts. They love podcasts in Australia. They're always trying to get us to come over there.
Well, Patrick, listen, I know you probably didn't need to do this, but man, what a joy it has been. This is truly an inspiration for somebody like me, and I think you guys will probably have loved listening to this episode. But go support Patrick in any way you can, because this is somebody that I'm like, I'm studying this man now. Like, I hope you eventually do a class, because I need to learn from you, and I learned a lot from you in this hour. Is there anything else you want to leave people with, or I think this is, you don't even have to sell this. This is just an automatic go. I'm ordering your book directly after I talk to you, because I cannot wait to read about you pissing on an airplane and other stories.
I will just say, if you like to laugh, you will like my book. It's called Failure's Not an Option. You can get it wherever you get your books. I did the audiobook for Audible too. If you want to hear me read it to you, that's an option. But thank you for having me.
Do you still love all this, Patrick? Do you still love all of this, or like, because sometimes you get up to the mic and like you'll be like, oh, I just don't feel it today. Do you still have the
I mean,
same passion?
I definitely have those moments where I'm tired, but I will tell you, people ask me why I get up so early. I get up at 4 in the morning. I get up that early because I kind of cannot wait to get to work. I really, really, really love that. I'm such a nerd that way.
Yeah, that's my vibe as well, and I'm just trying to get better and better. But man, this has been
Yeah.
fantastic. If you ever need anything from me, I am here for you. But you
Oh,
guys,
thank
this is a
you.
call to action. Let's go see this show. Let's get the book. Let's listen to these podcasts, but still actually try to listen to this podcast as well.
Of
Okay?
course.
Thank you.
Listen
I
to this one
appreciate it.
first, but then come see my show.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.